Tunisia's parliamentary elections late last month marked the country's second trip to the polls since its people set off a string of Arab Spring uprisings in 2011. But stability in the region is still far from a reality.
The
Tunisian people have reinforced their commitment to democracy with credible and transparent elections that gave Tunisians of all political tendencies a free vote.
Tunisia's citizens flocked to the polls to vote in the country's parliamentary elections, the second since the people revolted against their leaders almost 4 years ago. It was victory for the secular Nida Tounes party, but far from a landslide. Its candidates won 85 seats in the country's parliament, giving it the mandate to form a government and name a prime minister. The moderate Islamist party, Ennahda, won 69 seats.
I hope that the party that won these elections are high-minded and that they think of the young Tunisians and the eradication of terrorism. That is what we want from them.
Today we are not interested in Ennahda, Jabha or Nida Tounes or any other. We are thinking of our country. We must create jobs for the unemployed youth instead of fighting for seats. We want a party that will govern by thinking of the young people.
Up next for the young democracy, presidential elections later this month. While many global observers are holding the Tunisian elections up as an example of successful democratic transition post-Arab Spring, its neighbors, Egypt and Libya, haven't had such peaceful transitions to democracy. In Egypt, democratically elected President Mohamed Morsi was ousted after massive street protests on the first anniversary of his election. His Muslim Brotherhood political party was banned, and he now stands trial in a slew of charges ranging from espionage to fraud. Elections this past summer saw military leader General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi take over as president, winning 96% of the vote.
The future is a blank page, and it is in our hands to fill what we want: bread, freedom, human dignity, social justice.
But Egypt isn't on a solid footing yet. From a deadly car bombing last month to frequent power outages across the country, many people are uneasy about the current instability. Human rights groups are also expressing concerns.
Under the guise of the war on terror, all liberties are subjugated. Egypt has become increasingly militarized. There is lack of respect for all human rights, and there is no rule of law to speak of. The judiciary has become a tool of the military.
In neighboring Libya, unrest is close to spiraling out of control. The country has not had central leadership since the summer, instead dealing with two parliaments and prime ministers presiding over different parts of the country. This division has given rise to rival Libyan militias fighting for control of Benghazi and the country's profitable oil fields. This month, the Libyan Supreme Court announced the dissolution of the country's elected parliament, leading to further turmoil.
Any unrest in Libya will affect the neighboring countries.
Present-day Libya stands in stark contrast to the hopeful visions that emerged almost 4 years ago in the Arab Spring protests. So, where do these countries stand almost 4 years after the Arab Spring protests? Joining us now is Saha Khamis, a professor of communications at the University of Maryland. From New York, Hamid Abdel-Jabbar is with Rutger University Center for Middle Eastern Studies, and Najib Ayachi is the founder and president of the Maghreb Center. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Saha, let me start with you. Let's look at that broad question. Where do these countries stand almost 4 years after the uprisings? Is the Arab world, generally speaking, in a better place?
Well, this is a very complex and controversial issue because we cannot speak of all of these countries as fitting into one box or fitting into one model or paradigm. Obviously, as we have seen in the report at the beginning of this episode of your program, there are discrepancies and differences between these countries. The road or the path to democratic transition has not been smooth in many of the so-called post-Arab Spring countries, but the conditions of each country individually is very different from the other. Tunisia is a much smaller country than Egypt, which did not have all of the turmoil and the drastic changes that, for example, Egypt has witnessed, or the sectarian strife and tribalism that Libya is suffering from. So I think the transition to democracy in Tunisia has been smoother than its neighboring countries, Libya and Egypt. Egypt in particular, of course, I'm an Egyptian citizen, so that's the country I feel most confident or comfortable talking about, has had this very interesting, back and forth yo-yo effect where you're seeing a shrinking and stretching margin of freedom, and definitely not what the Egyptian people had hoped for. Ousting a democratically elected president from office just after 1 year of being in the presidency is not what the Egyptian people had hoped for. Returning back again to military rule and dictatorship is not something that Egyptians had hoped for. So there has been, shattered hopes and dreams. But again, the road or the path cannot be talked about unanimously or, being a one-size-fits-all in all of these countries.
Right. I want to go back to those events in Egypt in just a moment, but let's go to Hamid in New York. And Hamid, what is your view on what has happened in the Middle East, in the Arab world? Are we perhaps generalizing too much, and are we expecting too much in what is really a very short space of time?
Yeah, I should say that the beginning of the Arab Spring was similar in many Arab countries. The same reasons that led to the uprising in Tunisia, you find it in Egypt, Yemen, Bahrain, Syria, Libya, and other countries. I mean, the grassroots movement that started with youth, the educated, the marginalized, the unemployed, the social media activists, they have this similar concern. They want dignity, they want freedom, they want employment, they want to see their country free of dictatorship. They want to see a government represent the preferences of its own people without any corruption, no nepotism, no hereditary system, even for those republics. So you find the same symptoms in more than one Arab country. However, the development later differed from one country to the other, not only because the fabric of each society is different, but also there are level of interference from outside the world. I mean, the revolution in Bahrain, which started peacefully, it was crushed by a Saudi intervention. What happened in Yemen also, there was the Gulf Cooperation Council initiative, which led to the just changing the head of that government rather than accepting the conditions for a major change. What happened in Libya, there was external interference through military force. And the same thing with Syria. So we cannot put them in one basket, as my colleague said. But however, I mean, there are certain lessons we learned from this. I mean, the Arab people will come back. It's a revolution do not take just one cycle. Sometimes it takes years and years to reach stability. The most difficult part is between the beginning of a revolution to the stability stage, which takes sometimes years and years. Look at what happened in East Europe. Some countries did not stabilize until now.
Okay, let me bring Najib in. I guess the one common thread that runs through all these countries is that there was a desire for change. There was a desire for democracy, but the responses were very different.
Definitely.
We had one response in Tunisia, which is seen very much as a success story. Very different responses, as we can see right now in Egypt, in Syria, in Bahrain, in Libya, for that matter. What is your view on what's happened over the past few years?
I believe the uprisings or the Arab Spring went through basically 4 phases. The first one, during the first one, that started in 2011, 2010, 11, there was a wave of protests about dignity, citizenship, against corruption, for economic opportunity, etc. The second one started approximately in 2012. During that phase, we saw domestic structural issues within their own specific national historical context emerging. As you pointed out, Tunisia is different from, etc.,
right.
Egypt and Libya, etc. We also witnessed the beginning of external interferences to reshape these movements according to foreign interests. And during the first phase, I believe started more or less basically the past year, we have witnessed an intensification of the internationalization of these conflicts, particularly in Syria, but we're not going to have too much about Syria.
That's the U.S. involvement in the war there, right?
And Bahrain and to a certain extent, Libya. And in Tunisia, as well as in Egypt, a deepening of the the ideological divide between secular and Islamism. So I think we should not forget to mention outside interferences that have intensified internal tensions. It's obvious in the case of Syria, where by stressing identity politics, you know, all this turmoil started to get to such a huge level.
Right. So let's look at the case of Egypt in particular. You know, we had the Egyptians overthrow the government of Hosni Mubarak, and then we had an elected government under Mohamed Morsi. Up to that point, everything works. Democracy is working. Then we had Mohamed Morsi overthrown by the military. The military leader, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, becomes the president of Egypt. He says with 95% of the votes, but of course that doesn't include the Muslim Brotherhood, which was excluded from taking part in that election. So in effect, has Egypt took one step forward and two steps backwards.
Right, absolutely, and that's very frustrating and disappointing for the Egyptian people, because the whole point of the Arab Spring and the the Egyptian Revolution of 2011 was seeing some kind of smooth path to democratization and change in the country to make things better, not worse. And that's why a lot of the hopes and dreams were shattered when Morsi was ousted from office, through a military coup. Of course, some people are, having controversial views on this issue. Some people will say it's a popular uprising or a second revolution, while others will see it as a military coup. But as the report stated at the beginning of this program, we are seeing now a horrifying record of human rights violations. We are seeing many, many people, not just from the Brotherhood, but from across the board, people who have oppositional views. Many of them are harassed or arrested, put in jail, endangered, maybe fired from their jobs, killed. This is a very, stressful and very difficult situation when it comes to human rights violations and, things which the Egyptian people did not hope for in the first place.
Hamid, when we look at the Arab Spring, is it continuing? Does it continue in the Middle East?
It's going through a stage. I mean, as you said, one step forward, two steps back. I mean, if we look at what happened in Syria or what happened in Libya, we say, what kind of an outcome of the Arab Spring? However, I mean, the historical movement doesn't take just one stage. It takes time. There are a few things that had been established in the Arab world, that is this kind of regime that stays forever. That is, I think it's over. I mean, trying all those regimes to prepare and coach their sons to inherit the country, that is also, it's gone forever. I think treating the people just with the stick and the cannon, it doesn't work anymore. I mean, the people are now aware of their rights. The social media is connecting people all over. They know what's going on in other countries. They know the achievement, economic achievement of the East European Spring, which is in 20 years, some of the countries like Czech Republic, and became very important economic power. They see what the achievement had been in Turkey after the democracy had been established in 2002. Turkey became the 17th most powerful economy in the world. So I think now we're going through a stage. I mean, the interference from outside, especially the petrodollars, which had made sure that all those revolutions will be rolled back because the heat will reach them if all these revolutions will be successful. So they put billions of dollars to undo all these uprising, and they still continue to do. I think it's a stage. I think the public is aware. They know what's going on. It might take a while. I mean, that's ups and downs. But in my opinion, I mean, people do not commit suicide. I mean, people, they
right.
always, they're a movement forward, and it will take hard choices and hard sacrifices. But at the end, they will become successful.
I think that I want to just second this point, because the genie has been out of the bottle, as they say, and it's very hard to put it back again inside the bottle. So there's three ways to look at the situation. An optimistic scenario that says, the will of the people is going to prevail, everything is going to be okay. A pessimistic scenario that says, this is the end of the route to democratization. We're back again to square zero, from Tahrir Square to one square. Nothing has been achieved and everything has been a failure. And there is a realistic middle ground, which is the one I personally prefer or really like to buy into, which is, this is not a rosy picture. It's not exactly what Arab governments and Arab people have been hoping for sure. And it's not exactly what the Egyptian people have been dreaming of. But it's only a setback. It does not mean that we are completely reversing back, and it does not mean that nothing has been gained, nothing has been achieved. We just have to look at it in a realistic middle ground of cautionary optimism or realism that acknowledges this as a setback, but does not see it as a total defeat or failure.
Yeah. Najib, in Tunisia, a relative success story. What made Tunisia so different?
Listen, comparatively to Egypt, for example, because that's the best way to approach, in my opinion, this. Well, the size of the country is much, much smaller, 11 million versus 90 now million. A more homogeneous society. Egypt is also homogeneous, but Tunisia, I think, is even more. No ethnic divide in Tunisia to speak of, or religious. All Tunisians are Sunni Muslims, the small Jewish minority, tiny one, and that's basically it. The size of the middle class, relatively speaking, it's wider than in other countries in the Middle East and North Africa. And it's educated. The level of education, I think I don't have the figures here, but the literacy rate is higher than Egypt.
So it's not just a desire for democracy, other factors play a role.
And also the fact that the Islamists of Tunisia, I think it did help them a lot. They've been exiled to London, in most of their leadership, for over 2 decades, I believe, and I think that has helped them get a broader picture of things.
Go ahead.
Okay. The whole idea of, the Islamist party Al-Nahda, really setting a good model of moderate Islam and at the same time playing, in the fair elections and then not getting, a majority vote, but being a strong, movement in the political sphere is a good model, I think, to follow in other countries, because we have seen, the Islamists being completely exiled from the picture or totally crushed down or being, forced to go back again underground, as in the case in Egypt, which is really very serious, because once you push these movements underground, you are planting the seeds of radicalization and extremism, which is very, very dangerous. It does not help anybody's interest. So the model that we are seeing in Tunisia, in terms of seeing Al-Nahda play into the political sphere, winning one time, losing one time, is really a good thing.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break right now, Hamid. I'll come to you right after that. Coming up, we look at the future of the Arab Spring countries. That and more coming up next on The Heat. Stay with us.